It all started as a harmless curiosity. I had been rewatching Dragon Ball Z, indulging in the nostalgia of my childhood. Late one night, after the climactic battle between Goku and Vegeta, I found myself scrolling through obscure forums dedicated to the series. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trivia, fan theories, maybe some lost behind-the-scenes material. That's when I saw it. A thread titled, "The Forgotten Scion," a lost episode of Dragon Ball Z. The thread seemed out of place, buried deep in the archives of an old fan forum. There weren't many replies, but the ones that existed were strange, with people describing the episode as disturbing and too real to be fan-made. The original poster was anonymous, their username just a blank space, and their tone was unsettling. This episode aired only once in Japan, between the end of the Scion saga and the start of the Namek arc. It was pulled immediately and never mentioned by Toei Animation again. I found it on an old VHS tape, and it's unlike anything you've ever seen. If you think you can handle it, here's the link. They included a link to a download. It looked sketchy, a poorly formatted site, littered with pop-ups and ads. For a moment, I hesitated. It was probably a prank or some poorly made fan project. But something about the thread gripped me. Maybe it was the way the author wrote, like they knew it was wrong to share this. Against my better judgment, I clicked the link. The download was quick. A small file titled DBZ Lost Scion 24. The thumbnail showed nothing but darkness, with faint red streaks at the edges. As I hovered over the file, I felt an inexplicable chill, but I shrugged it off. It was probably nothing, I thought. I hit play. The first thing that struck me was the silence. There was no classic Dragon Ball Z intro, no upbeat music or colorful opening animation. The screen stayed black for several seconds, and I could faintly hear static. Then whispers. At first, I thought it was just an audio glitch, but as I strained to listen, I realized the whispers were in Japanese. Soft, rapid, and almost unintelligible. The visuals faded in slowly. It wasn't like any Dragon Ball Z episode one had ever seen. The animation style was darker, more detailed, almost hyper-realistic, but in a way that felt unnerving. The vibrant colors that defined the series were muted, replaced by dull grays and sickly greens. The sky was overcast, and the ground was cracked and barren, littered with craters and debris. In the middle of the desolate scene stood Goku, but not the Goku I knew. His GI was torn and blood-stained, his hair disheveled, his face devoid of his usual confidence or warmth. His shoulders slumped as though he carried an unbearable weight. He was staring into a massive crater, unmoving. The wind howled faintly in the background, carrying what sounded like distant screams. Goku finally spoke, his voice low and strained. Although I couldn't understand most of what he said, one word came through clearly. Kakarot. The camera slowly zoomed in on the crater, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something move within the shadows. A dark, shifting mass. It was so quick I wasn't even sure if it was real. Goku flinched, stepping back slightly, his expression tense. For the first time, I saw something I never expected to see in him. Fear. The camera cut wide and then he appeared. From the other side of the crater, a figure emerged. He was a Scion, but unlike any I had seen before. His armor was shattered, exposing burnt, scarred flesh beneath. He was taller than Vegeta, his frame larger, more imposing. His face was twisted with rage, a network of deep scars cutting across his features. But it was his eyes that struck me the most. They glowed red, burning with an unnatural light that seemed to pierce through the screen. Kakarot? The figure growled. His voice deep and distorted, reverberating unnaturally as if it came from multiple sources at once. For a long moment, Goku said nothing. He just stared at the figure, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and terror. It was as if he recognized the man but couldn't bring himself to say it. The Scion laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made my skin crawl. "You don't remember me, do you?" he said, his voice dripping with venom. "How convenient." He began to walk forward, each step heavy, the ground cracking beneath him. As he approached, he started to speak, explaining who he was and why he had come. He revealed that he was a scion, a failed experiment, a genetic anomaly deemed too dangerous to live. Instead of killing him, the elites of planet Vegeta had exiled him, launching him into the void of space in a defective pod, leaving him to drift in darkness for decades. I was awake the entire time, he hissed, watching, waiting, suffering. While you thrived, I rotted. Goku finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't make out his words, but they sounded apologetic, almost pleading. The other scions snarled, cutting him off. You're as weak as they were, he said, but I'm going to make you pay for their sins. The fight began suddenly. There was no build-up, no dramatic music. The other scion lunged at Goku with a speed that made the screen blur, slamming into him with such force that the ground beneath them shattered. Goku barely had time to block the blow, and the impact sent him flying into a nearby rock formation, which crumbled on contact. The animation became chaotic, almost unsettlingly realistic. Every punch, every kick landed with a sickening thud, accompanied by flashes of red light and sprays of blood. Goku fought back, but it was clear he was outmatched. His movements were slower, more desperate, his attacks lacking the usual confidence. The other scion was relentless, his strikes fueled by a hatred so intense it seemed to radiate from him like an aura. But it wasn't just the violence that unsettled me. It was the way the scene was animated. The blows didn't feel exaggerated or stylized like in a typical DBZ fight. They felt real, too real. Goku's expressions of pain were visceral, his screams guttural. The background began to distort as the fight continued. The colors shifted, growing darker, and the sky turned a deep, unnatural red. The sound design became warped, with the wind now sounding like whispers, and faint screams echoing in the distance. The other scion pinned Goku to the ground, his hand glowing with an ominous black energy. Goku struggled, his face contorted in agony, but he couldn't break free. The scion leaned in close, his voice low and guttural. You abandoned your kind, he said. Now you'll feel their pain. The screen went black. The audio continued for several seconds. Goku's screams were muffled, blending with the whispers that now seemed louder, more distinct. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable, accusatory, condemning. When the visuals returned, Goku was gone. In his place was a massive, smoking crater, identical to the one at the beginning of the episode. The other scion stood at its edge, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he turned to face the camera. And then he looked at me. It wasn't just a character looking at the screen. It felt like he was looking through it, staring directly at me. His glowing red eyes seemed to burn into my mind, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The camera pulled back, showing Earth from orbit. But it wasn't the Earth I knew. The skies were crimson, the oceans blackened, and faint shadows moved across the surface. Scion pods descended from the heavens, their lights flickering ominously as they approached. The episode ended abruptly, cutting to static. There were no credits, only lines of corrupted text scrolling across the screen, too distorted to read. My computer froze, and when I finally managed to restart it, the file was gone. So was the forum thread. At first, I tried to dismiss it as a fan-made horror project, but something about it lingered. The screams, the whispers, they stayed with me, echoing in my mind. That night, I dreamed of the wasteland from the episode. Goku stood in the distance, his back to me. When I called out to him, he turned slowly. His eyes were hollow, lifeless. You weren't supposed to see this, he said. His voice was a whisper, but it filled the air, growing louder until it was all I could hear. Since then, strange things have been happening. My TV turns on by itself, always to static. At night, I hear faint whispers, low and persistent. They're always saying the same thing. Kakarot, Kakarot. And they're getting louder.